So let's talk about negative exponents. Negative exponents, whenever you have them, we briefly touched on this before, is that whenever you have a negative exponent, the way to get rid of that negative is to rewrite it using the reciprocal. So if you can imagine that if this had an imaginary number denominator, it would be a 1, right? If you flipped it, getting the reciprocal, it would be 1 over a to the n. And it would, by getting the reciprocal, you're getting that negative n to be a positive n. So it's just taking the inverse, the reciprocal of a to the negative n, putting it under 1, and it immediately makes this a positive exponent. So let's look at some examples to make that more clear. So if you have a negative exponent that you're given, you're going to write it under a 1, and then you'll get that into a form where the exponent is positive. So if we had 3 to the negative 4, the first thing you would do is you would write 1 over 3. Instead of to the negative 4th power, it would be to the positive 4th power. So 1 over 3 to the 4th power. And of course what that means is 1 over 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. And if you multiply that out, you end up getting 3 times 3 and 3 times 3, which is 9 times 9, which is 81, right? So you end up getting 1 over 81. And what you're saying is 3 to the negative 4th power is the same as, or equivalent to 1 over 81. So let's try another one. 2 to the negative 3rd power. Again, we want to rewrite that with a positive exponent. So we're going to get the reciprocal by writing it all under a 1. So we're going to take this whole thing and leave the negative behind. So it becomes 2 to the 3rd power. And again, what does that equal? That's 1 over 2 times 2 times 2, which is the same thing as saying 1 over 8. So pretty simple. 4 to the negative 2 power, 1 over 4 to the 2nd power, or 4 squared, which is 1 over 4 times 4, which is 1 over 16. So far so good. That's nothing too complicated yet. Hopefully all that is clear. So now let's move on and see how it could look different. Sometimes you'll see parentheses, and there's a little parentheses rule you have to be careful about. If you see a parentheses, that means anything in the parentheses is getting repeated. Still, the same rule applies with the negative exponent, though. If you want this to be rewritten with a positive exponent, you're putting the entire thing under a 1. So you're taking the reciprocal, you're going to bring the parentheses with you, and notice the negative 2 remains a negative 2. The only thing that becomes positive is that 4, because the negative 4 is now a positive 4. Now, because there's the negative within the parentheses, what gets repeated is 1 over negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. And then when we multiply all of that out, we get 1 over 16 as our answer. And we know we have an even amount of negative numbers, so we have a positive answer there. So negative 2 to the negative 4th power is 1 over 16. Well, now, if I were to read this, I might think it's exactly the same, but it's really not, because there are no parentheses here. It's written differently. We still put it all under 1. We're going to bring the whole thing down. The negative stays there with the big number, right? And the exponent becomes positive. Okay. So now, the reason why this is different, and if you remember earlier in the year we talked about this, is because when we rewrite it, the negative is kind of hanging out on its own over there. The only thing that's getting repeated is what's attached to the exponent. So it becomes 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. And then what happens is this becomes 16, and it becomes 1 over 16, and the negative gets added on at the end. Because there is only one negative sign, the entire thing is negative. So it's negative 1 over 16. You can go ahead and rewrite that on the top of the fraction next to the numerator. So there you go. The other thing I wanted to talk about is negative exponents with a fraction. This is still the same thing. Whenever you have a negative exponent, what do? We put it under a 1. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to take the entire thing, we're going to put it under a 1. So 1 over, I'm going to recopy the entire thing here. We're going to leave out that negative sign though, because we got the reciprocal, and it becomes 1 over 2/5 times 2/5, which is 1 over 4 over 25, because we're just multiplying straight across. And if you think about it, this line right here is division. So if I were to rewrite that, it would be 1 divided by 4 over 25. That's all that is. 1 divided by 4 over 25. And we know when we have division, what we have to do is multiply by the reciprocal. And when we do that, our final answer is 25 over 4. Now, that might seem a little complicated, but really it's not. All you're doing is taking the entire thing, remembering the rule about negative exponents, putting the entire thing under a 1, expanding it out, multiplying, and multiplying it out until you get 4 over 25, still under the 1, and then just reading it. 1 divided by 4 over 25. Rewriting it this way. 1 divided by 4 over 25 is 1 times 25 over 4, and then you get that answer. So if you can think of this, whenever you have 1 divided by a fraction, what you end up getting is the reciprocal. So if you ever see something like this, you can go ahead and do all the steps so it's clear to you. But if you ever see 1 divided by 4 over 25, your answer will always be the reciprocal of that bottom fraction. So I'm going to show you another one just so you can make sure that this is all clear. Again, we're going to take this and we're going to put it all under the 1. So it's negative 1/4. And now we're going to, instead of negative 3, we're going to make it a positive 3. And then we're going to go ahead and expand that out into the repeated multiplication. It becomes negative 1 over 4 times negative 1 over 4, because that's negative is in the parentheses, it's getting repeated, times negative 1 over 4. Okay, and then when we multiply it all out, we get 1 over negative 1 over 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 is 64. Okay. Now, again, we have 1 divided by negative 1 over 64. We know that's the same as 1 times negative 64 over 1, which is the same going straight across as negative 64 over 1, or negative 64, right? Now, you don't have to do all of these steps. If you can just remember, if I'm dividing a fraction underneath a 1, that fraction gets flipped and the reciprocal ends up being the answer. So you can see that this fraction right here got flipped in the end, right? And then our answer, because it was a 1, we just left out that 1. The same thing happened in the one prior. If you look back to this one, this fraction right here got flipped. That's how you got your final answer. You can go ahead, like I said, and do all of those steps just so it's clear and you don't make a mistake. That's fine too. But if you like a little bit of a shortcut, you can just remember that little rule about flipping what's in the denominator if it's a fraction. And that's it. A bunch to cover. Relook at everything. Try to do it on your own. See if you can rework all of these problems. I know you can.